The gunshots echoed across the canyon, like thunder trapped in stone, sharp and violent against the endless silence of the Arizona desert. Jake Morrison pulled his horse to a halt on the ridge, sweat cutting clean lines through the dust on his weathered face. Below in the arroyo, smoke curled up from what looked like the remains of a wagon, the wood still crackling with orange flames that licked at the merciless afternoon sky. He counted 4 bodies sprawled in the dirt, their shapes already drawing buzzards from the distant mesas, but it was the 5th figure that made his breath catch in his throat. Tied to a dead Joshua tree at the edge of the wash, a woman hung by her wrists, her body limp as a broken doll. Even from this distance, Jake could see the deep bronze of her skin, the long black hair that fell like a curtain across her face, and the intricate beadwork on what remained of her torn clothing. Apache, he thought, his jaw tightening. The outlaws had taken their time with her. Jake had been tracking the Kellerman gang for 3 days now, following their trail of burned homesteads and murdered families across the territorial line. They were the kind of men who killed for sport and took what they wanted without conscience. But this was something else entirely. This was cruelty that went beyond greed, beyond even hatred. This was desecration. He urged his horse down the steep slope, rocks skittering under the animal's hooves as they descended into the wash. The smell hit him first, acrid smoke mixed with blood, and something else, something medicinal and earthy that seemed to emanate from the woman herself. As he drew closer, he could see the shallow rise and fall of her chest, alive, but barely. The outlaws' tracks led west toward the border, deep and hurried. They had finished their business here and moved on, leaving death in their wake like seeds scattered on barren ground. Jake dismounted near the tree, his boots crunching on broken glass and scattered beads that caught the sunlight like drops of colored water. She was younger than he had expected, maybe 25, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that spoke of nobility even in unconsciousness. Her wrists were raw from the rope, and dried blood crusted the corner of her mouth. But what struck him most were her hands, delicate fingers stained with what looked like plant dyes, green and yellow and deep earth brown. A healer, he realized. The outlaws had taken a medicine woman. "Easy now," Jake murmured, though she could not hear him. He pulled out his knife and began sawing at the rope. "I got you." The rope gave way with a sharp snap, and she collapsed forward into his arms. Her body was warm despite everything, and light in a way that reminded him of his sister before the fever took her. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, dark as obsidian, filled with pain but also with something else. Recognition, maybe, or hope. Jake carried her to his horse and lifted her carefully into the saddle, then swung up behind her. She leaned back against his chest, unconscious again, her breathing shallow but steady. The buzzards were already circling lower, drawn by the scent of the dead. There was nothing more he could do for the others, but this one he could save. His ranch lay 15 miles north, a modest spread tucked into a valley between red rock mesas. It was not much more than a cabin, a barn and a corral, but it was honest work and honest land. Jake had built it with his own hands after the war, needing something clean and simple after too many years of violence and death. He had thought he was done saving people, done fighting other men's battles. But the weight of the woman in his arms told him otherwise. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Jake carried her inside and laid her on his bed, then lit the oil lamp and set it on the table beside her. In the flickering light, he could see the full extent of what had been done to her. Bruises darkened her arms and throat, and her clothing was torn in places that spoke of violence beyond mere robbery. But it was her hands that drew his attention again. Even unconscious, her fingers seemed to move with purpose, as if reaching for something. Jake looked closer and saw that her palms were deeply stained, not just with plant dyes, but with what looked like medicinal preparations. Powdered roots, maybe, or ground herbs. She was a healer, all right, and from the look of her hands, a skilled one. Jake fetched water from the well and began cleaning her wounds as gently as he could. She stirred once, her eyes opening to focus on his face with an intensity that made him pause. She studied him for a long moment, taking in his weathered features, his graying beard, the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. Then she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Why?" she asked in accented English. Jake met her gaze steadily. "Because it was the right thing to do." She considered this, then closed her eyes again. But something in the set of her shoulders had relaxed, as if she had decided he could be trusted, at least for now. Over the next 3 days she said little, but Jake could sense her watching him as he went about his daily routine. She ate the broth he brought her, drank the water without question, and allowed him to change the bandages on her wrists. But she remained distant, guarded, like a wild animal deciding whether to flee or stay. It was on the 4th morning that Jake found her outside, sitting cross-legged beside the small vegetable garden he kept behind the cabin. Her hands moved over the plants with practiced familiarity, touching leaves, smelling stems, occasionally plucking something and tucking it into a fold of her skirt. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, her expression unreadable. "Your sage is diseased," she said, pointing to a cluster of grayish plants at the edge of the garden. "And your beans need different soil, too much clay." Jake squatted beside her, looking at the plants with new eyes. "You know about growing things?" "I know about healing things," she corrected. "Plants, animals, people. It is what I was born to do." "The men who took you," Jake said carefully. "They knew what you were." Her face darkened. "They knew. They wanted me to make medicine for them, to heal their leader. He was shot, dying. They thought they could force me." She looked down at her stained hands. "I told them I would not heal those who murder children." Jake's jaw tightened. The Kellerman gang had hit a family homestead 2 weeks ago, killed the parents and 2 young ones. He had seen the bodies himself. "So they decided to make an example of you." "Yes. They said they would leave me for the sun to finish. Let the other tribes know what happens to those who refuse white men's demands." She met his eyes again. "But you came instead." That afternoon, she showed him how to make poultices from the plants growing wild around his property. Her hands moved with sure knowledge, grinding roots between stones, mixing powders with water to make healing pastes. She worked in silence mostly, but Jake could see the peace that settled over her face when she was at her craft. This was who she was meant to be, he realized. Not a victim, not a prize to be taken, but a healer, a keeper of ancient knowledge. "What do I call you?" he asked as they worked side by side in the fading light. She paused in her grinding, considering. "My people call me many things. But you may call me Senna. It is close enough to my name, and it is also a healing plant. It seems fitting." Jake nodded. "Senna, then. And I'm Jake Morrison." "I know," she said simply. "I asked the wind, and it told me." He looked at her sharply, but her expression was serious, matter-of-fact. There was no mockery in it, no mysticism for show. She simply spoke of the wind the way another person might speak of asking a neighbor for directions. It was the 5th night when the first warrior appeared. Jake was banking the fire in the cabin when he heard the soft whinny of his horse from the corral. Not alarmed exactly, but alert. He stepped outside and saw the figure standing at the edge of his property, motionless as the standing stones he had seen in the desert. Tall, painted for war, carrying a bow and a quiver of arrows. Apache, without question. Jake's hand moved instinctively to the gun at his hip, then stopped. The warrior made no move to approach, no gesture of aggression. He simply stood there, watching, waiting. "Senna," Jake called softly. She appeared in the doorway behind him, took one look at the figure in the darkness, and nodded as if she had been expecting this. "They have come to see if I am well," she said. "They?" As if summoned by her words, more figures emerged from the shadows. They came from behind rocks, from gullies, from places Jake would have sworn were empty. One by one, they appeared until there were perhaps 20 of them arrayed in a loose semicircle around his property. All warriors, all armed, all watching with the patience of men who had learned to wait for the right moment to strike. Jake felt sweat break out on his forehead, despite the cool night air. He was outnumbered, outflanked, and probably outmatched. But Senna moved past him, walking slowly toward the closest warrior. She spoke in Apache, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. The warrior replied, his tone respectful, almost reverent. The conversation went on for several minutes, with other warriors occasionally adding words. Jake caught none of it, but he could read the body language well enough. These were not raiders come to take revenge. These were men seeking answers. Finally, Senna turned back to him. They want to know why you helped me. They want to know if you can be trusted. What did you tell them? I told them the truth. That you saved me not because I was Apache, not because I was a woman, but because I was in need. I told them you asked for nothing in return, expected nothing. I told them your heart is good. Jake looked out at the ring of warriors, their faces painted with ochre and charcoal, their eyes reflecting the lamplight from the cabin. And what do they say to that? Senna spoke again in Apache, and several of the warriors nodded. The closest one, who seemed to be their leader, stepped forward and addressed Jake directly. His English was heavily accented but clear. You saved our medicine woman, he said. She is precious to us. More than gold, more than horses, more than land. Without her, the children die when sickness comes. The old ones suffer without comfort. The warriors cannot heal from battle wounds. He paused, studying Jake's face. Why did you do this thing? Jake considered his answer carefully. These men had the power to kill him where he stood, but he sensed that honesty was more important than diplomacy here. I did it because she needed help, and I was able to give it. No other reason. The warrior leader exchanged glances with his companions, then nodded slowly. This is a good answer. A true answer. He reached into a pouch at his side and withdrew something small and dark. My name is Nilnish. I am war chief of the Red Rock people. This woman you call Senna, we call Ita. It means she who brings life back. He held out his hand, palm up. In it lay a small carved stone, smooth and warm-looking. This is a token of our gratitude. It will tell our people that you are a friend to the Apache, that you are under our protection. Jake took the stone, feeling its weight in his palm. It was carved in the shape of a bird with outstretched wings, every feather detailed with incredible precision. I'm honored, he said, and meant it. Nilnish nodded again. You may keep Ita as long as she wishes to stay. When she is ready to return to us, we will come for her. But know this, Jake Morrison, if any harm comes to her while she is in your care, if any man tries to take her again, you have only to hold that stone to the sky at sunset. We will come. All of you? Jake asked, looking around at the assembled warriors. Nilnish smiled, and for the first time, there was warmth in it. All of us. And others. Word has already spread to the other bands about what you did. The mountain people, the desert people, the river people, they all know of the white man who saved our medicine woman. You have more friends than you know, Jake Morrison. With that, he turned and walked back into the darkness. One by one, the other warriors melted away as silently as they had appeared, until Jake and Senna stood alone in the circle of lamplight from the cabin. They were testing me, Jake said. Yes, and you passed. Senna looked down at the carved stone in his hand. That is not just a token, Jake, it is a promise. My people do not make such promises lightly. Over the following weeks, Senna began to transform Jake's simple ranch into something richer, more alive. She planted new herbs in his garden, arranged the vegetables in patterns that seemed to make them grow stronger and healthier. She showed him how to read the sky for weather, how to listen to the wind for messages, how to understand the language of birds and insects. But it was the way she looked at him that changed most of all. The wariness faded, replaced by something softer, warmer. She began to smile more often, to laugh at his clumsy attempts to pronounce Apache words. She would sit with him in the evenings, grinding medicines by lamplight, and tell him stories of her people, their beliefs, their connection to the land. "We believe," she said one night as they worked together, "that every person has a path laid out by the spirits. Sometimes the path is straight and easy. Sometimes it winds through dark places, over hard ground. But always it leads where it is meant to lead." "And where is your path leading?" Jake asked. She looked at him for a long moment, her hands still working the mortar and pestle. "I think it is leading to a new place, a place I have never been before." She paused. "What about yours?" Jake considered the question. His path had certainly wound through dark places, the war, the death of his family, the years of loneliness and guilt that had followed. But sitting here with Senna, watching her gentle hands create healing from simple plants, he felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. "I think," he said slowly, "my path is leading to the same place as yours." The attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. Jake was repairing fence posts near the corral when he heard the thunder of hoofbeats approaching fast. He looked up to see 6 riders cresting the ridge, moving at a gallop toward his ranch. Even at a distance, he recognized the leader's profile. Bull Kellerman, the outlaw chief, scarred and mean as a wounded bear. Jake dropped his tools and ran for the cabin, shouting Senna's name. She appeared in the doorway, took one look at the approaching riders, and her face went pale. "The stone," she said urgently. "Where is the stone Nalnish gave you?" Jake fumbled for the carved bird in his pocket, pulled it out, and held it high toward the sky. The sun was directly overhead, nothing like the sunset Nalnish had specified. But maybe, just maybe, it would work anyway. The outlaws were close now, close enough for Jake to see the fury on Kellerman's face, the fresh bandages wrapped around his torso where someone had tried to kill him. The gang leader's eyes fixed on Senna with a hatred that burned like acid. "There's the witch!" Kellerman shouted to his men. "The one who let me suffer with poison in my blood while she sat in comfort with her white protector." He raised his rifle. "Time to finish what we started." Jake stepped in front of Senna, his own gun in his hand, 6 against 2 with Senna unarmed. Not good odds, but he had faced worse. The first shots rang out just as Jake heard something else, the sound of war cries echoing from the mesas around his ranch. The outlaws heard it too, their heads jerking up in alarm as arrows began to rain down from the rocks above. Warriors poured over the ridgeline, painted for battle, moving with the fluid grace of men born to this landscape. Nalnish led them, bow in one hand, war club in the other. He let out a cry that seemed to shake the very stones of the desert, and the Apache warriors swept down on the outlaws like a flood. The fight was brief and terrible. The outlaws, caught in the open, tried to make a stand near their horses, but they were surrounded, outnumbered, and fighting men who knew every rock and gully of this country. Kellerman himself went down with 3 arrows in his chest, his rifle unfired, his last breath a curse that the wind carried away like smoke. When it was over, when the dust had settled and the bodies lay still, Nalnish walked over to where Jake and Senna stood by the cabin. His face was streaked with war paint and sweat, but his eyes were calm. "You held the stone to the sky," he said simply. "We came." Jake looked around at the 24 warriors who had materialized from the desert at his moment of need. "How? How did you know?" Nalnish smiled. "The spirits have many messengers, Jake Morrison. Hawks see far, coyotes run fast. And some of my young men have been watching over you as I promised they would." He gestured toward the rocks above. "They saw the outlaws coming from many miles away." "Thank you," Jake said, and the words seemed inadequate for what had just happened. "You do not thank family," Nalnish replied, "and that is what you are now. Family." That evening, after the warriors had departed and the bodies had been taken away, Jake and Senna sat together on the porch of the cabin. The desert stretched out before them, painted in shades of gold and purple by the setting sun. Senna leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart. "My real name," she said quietly, "is Aiyana. It means eternal blossom. My grandmother gave it to me when I was born because she said I would bring new life wherever I went." Jake turned the name over in his mouth, tasting its beauty. "Aiyana. It suits you better than Senna. I wanted you to know," she continued, "before I tell you the other thing. The thing I have been waiting to say." "What thing?" She took his hand and placed it on her belly, just below her ribs. At first, Jake felt nothing. Then, as if summoned by his touch, something fluttered there like a bird's wing against his palm. "New life," Aiyana whispered, "growing inside me. Our child." Jake stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had told him. A child. Their child. He thought of all the things that could go wrong, all the dangers that lay ahead for a mixed-blood child in this harsh country. But then he looked into Aiyana's eyes and saw only joy there, only hope for the future they would build together. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also happier than I've ever been in my life." She smiled and kissed him softly. "Good. Fear means you understand how precious this is, how precious we are." They sat in silence as the stars began to appear, bright points of light in the vast darkness above. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and the desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. 6 months later, Jake stood in the doorway of a new cabin, larger than the first, built with help from Nalnish's warriors. Inside, Aiyana sat in a rocking chair by the window, nursing their son. The baby was perfect dark hair like his mother's, his father's grey eyes, and skin the color of desert sand at sunset. "What will we call him?" Jake asked, settling into the chair beside them. Aiyana looked down at the child, then out at the vast landscape beyond their windows. "Takoda," she said. "It means friend to everyone, because that is what he will be. A bridge between worlds, a healer like his mother, a protector like his father." Jake reached out to touch his son's tiny hand, marveling at the perfection of the small fingers. "Takoda Morrison," he said. "I like it." "Not Morrison," Aiyana corrected gently. "Takoda Two Hearts. That is his Apache name. He will need both names in this world, one for the white man's law, one for his spirit." Jake nodded, understanding. Their son would walk between two worlds, just as his parents had learned to do. It would not be easy, but they would give him the tools he needed: love, wisdom, and the knowledge that he was wanted by both sides of his heritage. As if sensing his father's thoughts, little Takoda opened his eyes and looked directly at Jake. In that gaze, Jake saw the future spreading out like a trail across the desert, clear, challenging, but full of promise. He saw his son growing strong and proud, saw other children who would come after, saw a family that would bridge the gap between Apache and white, between old ways and new. And in the distance, so faint it might have been imagination, Jake heard the sound of drums echoing from the mesas, a rhythm like heartbeats, like the pulse of life itself, welcoming the newest member of the tribe. The desert wind blew soft and warm through the open windows, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of rain. And in the little cabin where love had triumphed over hatred, where healing had conquered hurt, a new story was just beginning. If this tale of courage, love, and unlikely alliances moved your heart, if it reminded you that true strength comes not from the gun at your hip, but from the choices you make when no one is watching, then you found your place in the Wild West. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of forbidden romance, quiet heroism, and bonds that transcend the boundaries of blood and culture. In a world where bullets fly and hearts break, every story is a testament to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Subscribe now and never miss a heartbeat from the frontier.